Hey everybody, what's up? I want to talk about something called intent mapping today, and I'm going to use my Agentic Realms online game to demonstrate that. But before I continue, make sure you, what is it, hit subscribe and smash like, or is it smash subscribe and hit like? I don't know, smash something and I'll be happy. So, if you're not familiar with MUDs, or text adventures in general, the main idea is that in these text adventures, let me see if I can go here. There we go. In these text adventures, we have things that we can interact with, and historically, we would interact with them through text or, yeah, it's mostly through text. Some graphic clients or some of the fancier clients had macros and buttons that you could use in order to go north or south or east or west or whatever. And we would interact with them by typing things like, kill soldier or cast fireball or climb rock or pull candlestick, whatever. The general idea is you had a verb and you had an object, and in the old days, when everything was running inside a single process and we didn't have very much memory, we would parse the commands that you would type by assuming that the first word you typed was the verb, and the next word you typed was an object of some kind. Sometimes we would get really fancy and we'd be able to do things like attack soldier with sword, and we would be able to have both a direct object and an indirect object. That was about as fancy as it got. And to show you that I can still do those things in my game, I can type look, I can even type go south and go north, and there we go. I even have some mapping that will show up rooms and so on as I explore them. It's all fairly standard mud stuff. But what's really cool about being able to do this agentic AI integration is that I can do intent mapping. And intent mapping, in the abstract sense, is being able to take the intent or goal of something that someone typed and convert it into actionable data. And so many years ago, I experimented with natural language processing, and I wanted to be able to convert an intent from that. And that was a pretty terrible experiment. It didn't work very well. The natural language processing server took too many resources. But now we have AI and we have LLMs, and I can use tools like an SDK, or make RESTful HTTP requests. And if you think about what the LLMs do for us, most of what they're doing is intent mapping. And there's a whole bunch of details underneath that. But when I go to an AI agent and I type what I want, the first thing it's going to do is attempt to map my natural language to discrete intent. And then it'll try and infer an answer based on my intent. And, one day I realized that this is exactly what MUDs needed. And so I thought, well, can I try and integrate this intent mapping into MUDs, or specifically my MUD? Because one of the things that broke immersion in MUDs so often was, if the game was designed to understand go south, right? But then it wouldn't be able to deal with things like, freeform text like hoof it north or head north or, hop, skip, and jump north, that kind of thing. And so there was this gap between, the machine that would understand my verbs and objects and what the human actually wanted. And so one of my first experiments was to try and integrate an LLM in my input processing. So first thing I did was I made it so that every single piece of input that a person typed went through the LLM for intent mapping. And that sort of worked, but if you've used AI at all, you know that that's just going to run up huge token bills, even if I'm doing it against a cheat model. So the next thing I did was a sort of a fall through pattern where if something that somebody types doesn't match one of the verb object patterns, then I ask the LLM to try and determine the intent. And then I have these intents that can then be executed on. So let's say I have an intent for moving my character in a specific direction. Now, if you've used LLMs recently and you've been, looking at some of the developer conversations that have been going on, you're probably familiar with things called tool calls or tools or even protocols like MCP. And when you distill those down to what they're supposed to do, is very specifically intent mapping. I'll send a prompt to my LLM like jog north or whatever. And what I want to send along with it is a list of tools that are available to that LLM in order to do its job. And so one of those tools might be move. And that tool has a description, like move the character in a particular direction. And it then has a parameter, which also has a description, like the direction in which to move. And when I send those tool descriptions along with my prompt to the LLM, the thing that the LLM does best is mapping my language, my natural language prompt to the one of the tools in that list. And so I had this crazy realization that instead of doing things sort of the old and hard way, trying to get an LLM to give me back like a JSON payload or a YAML payload or something that I could then parse again into an action, I'm just going to let the LLM, quote unquote, do the action for me. And so when I make this prompt, the LLM is going to come back and say, in order to satisfy this prompt, you need to invoke move north. And so my code has a plugin function, and in this case, it's written in Elixir. And that function moves a character north based on a particular context. And so I now have this really cool match where anytime I want to add a capability to my application that characters can then perform, I just make it a tool call. I describe the tool, I describe the parameters, and then I write the function that my agent is going to invoke when the LLM comes back and says, hey, I need a tool to execute. So I should be able to do things like head south. You see, it says thinking. Now I've gone south. What's actually happened is I don't have a verb defined called head, but I do have a tool defined called move. And inside my tool definition for move, it has text like move the character in a particular direction. And so the LLM has determined that I want to head south, that I want to do movement. And so it then looks up the tool. It does an intent map as well as extracts the parameters. And so it realizes, okay, this person is trying to use the movement tool and they're trying to do it in the direction south. So my code then gets called that says move south or move down or whatever. And so then my code gets to handle it as though it was a regular in-game command. And so while this pattern took a bit to set up, it's just unbelievably powerful how, and I may nerd out here a little bit, but it's unbelievably cool how every time I want to add a new capability that can be run with a user's natural language input, I just add a tool call and everything just sort of magically falls into place. So I could maybe do jog down. We'll see if that moves me. Yes, it knew that that was, uh, and now we'll see if take a gander actually works. I don't know. Yeah, not try. Oh, so it thought I was trying to examine a specific thing. So we'll see if I can do take a gander at the brass lantern. Again, I haven't scripted any of this, so I have no idea if this is going to actually work. There you go. Check that out. I typed take a gander at the brass lantern, and the LLM also has, in its context, when I send my prompt, it has a description of all the objects that are in the room along with me. So when the LLM runs its resolution to try and figure out what tool to call, it's going to know, here, you can run this tool, and the brass lantern is available as an examination target. So then it's going to call my tool back and say, the user wanted to look at this object, and my code just runs it. So all of this unbelievably annoying stuff that I used to have to do, manually and pray for the best is gone. And so now, when a player is interacting with my game, let's see if I can do head south. Yeah. Now, when players interact with my game, they can interact with my game on their terms. And my job is really just a matter of supplying a list of possible tools to the LLM and then having the LLM run that. And, it's fairly simple in what I've been showing, like head south, take a gander at, and jog, and so on. But if we expand that a little bit and we think about what we might be able to do in the future and the very near future, the possibilities are pretty cool. So let's say, for example, the character is a magic user, and they want to cast a spell, and they use whatever intent they want in order to describe the fact that they want to cast the spell. And so now cast becomes a tool call, and the list of available spells is in my context when I send the message to the LLM. So it can immediately decide whether casting that spell is possible, and if not, then another one of my tools is called refuse, and that tool basically allows the LLM to provide me with a description of why my call failed. And it's probably going to say something like, couldn't find that spell, or you don't have that spell. And even cooler is I get to do things like, if I type cast fireball, and the real name of the spell is called magic missile, but in the description it says that it casts a fireball, the LLM is going to be able to pick up on that, map the intent properly, and invoke the right tool, which in turn is my code for invoking the real spell cast. So this stuff is just insanely cool, and I can't wait to start messing with it a little bit more. The next thing on my agenda is giving NPCs access to a tool list, as the list of things that they can do in response to a trigger. And so those triggers could be a player entering the room, a player leaving the room, a player saying a particular phrase. So yeah, I'm super excited about what using LLMs and agents in the right place for the right things is going to do for my game. And as with all of the examples that I make when I'm working on making these games, yes, it's because it's fun, but it's also a way of experimenting with patterns in a fun way. And so one of the things that I'm really starting to embrace now that I've done this is how the set of tools that you provide to an LLM is absolutely critical for whether or not you're going to get predictable behavior. And you use the LLM for the things that it's good at, like intent mapping and intent inference and things like that. And the things that you need to be deterministic, you make tool calls. And that dividing line or that boundary is it's the thing that decides whether or not your agent is going to be successful. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll probably be following this up with another video walkthrough of some of the other features that I built on top of this new LLM integration.